everyone. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Caitlin Byrne. I'm the director of the Griffith Asia Institute. And it's a really great pleasure to be with you all today. So Bula Vinaka to all our governors who are joining us and deputy governors. We're really pleased with the generosity of your time and the fact that you're with us today, but also to our supporters, sponsors, participants. Thank you for joining us today. It's really excellent to have you here. If I can begin firstly by respectfully acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm joining you. It's the Turrbal and Jagera people here in Brisbane, but I know there are many joining from many other lands, and I welcome you all. I pay my respects also to elders past and present, and extend that to all First Nations peoples, including those who might be joining us today. So it is a really great pleasure for us to be here and to kick off a discussion session with governors and participants as well. It's been really fantastic for me this morning to listen to the conversations already, and fabulous to have the Vice-Chancellor and President of Griffith University, Professor Carolyn Evans, joining us, as well as Minister Alex Hawke and Governor Bakani from the Bank of PNG delivering remarks, as well as Parmendra Sharma, who's really been leading this program from within Griffith University. It was 2 years ago that I attended the regional conference in Suva that was hosted by the Reserve Bank of Fiji with Griffith University. And I remember thinking and being so struck at that time about how important it was for us to understand the experiences of Pacific Island nations and really be able to think through some of the policy issues being faced by central banks. I think I had arrived at that conference coming back from a conference on the G20, and, you know, as someone who spends a bit of time in that space, particularly focused on women's economic governance, I think we have to be able to really draw on the experiences of our region and understand what's happening, because often they're quite unique and different to some of the experiences that we might be feeling in other parts of the world. So I think this is a really fantastic forum for us to delve into some of those issues and to learn from each other and encourage that sharing of information. I was also really struck at some of the comments made this morning about the importance of leadership. And again, I'd like to just thank the governors and deputy governors of the central banks of the Pacific for the leadership they've really shown today, particularly in working and encouraging us to work across the region, to collaborate across the region, to encourage and share our learnings across the region. Central banks, more than ever before, are playing a really key role in policy development, and certainly as we come out of the COVID-19 era into a recovery stage, that's just going to continue. And I think the central bank policy responses will have significant impacts. They'll have significant impacts across the region, at national levels, for communities, but importantly across households in the region. So it's one of the areas where we really see the impact of policy at just about every dimension, and ordinary people will feel those impacts. So I think it's an area we want to get right. We want to be able to contest and talk about policy approaches and to develop and learn from each other. It's really hard, I think, in this very early post-COVID period not to be gripped by the immediate and very compelling economic issues that we're facing. And I think the Minister and Governor Bakani spoke, you know, very vividly to those. But I think in doing that, we're also increasingly aware of the fact that economic policy doesn't just happen in a vacuum anymore. Banks don't central banks certainly are not in a position of making policy on their own and isolated from other dimensions of society. And increasingly, they have to reflect the health and well-being of our societies and our people, our communities, as well as an increasing concern about our climate and environmental resilience in the face of the looming challenge of climate change, or the challenges we're feeling every day from climate change. It does require our institutions to work differently. And I think we're seeing this already, where governments And banks have to work, of course, with private sector, with civil society, with community leaders, with academic institutions, and not just on that national or bilateral level, but also, of course, in a multilateral sphere and across the region. And I think that's why I'm just so very proud that Griffith University is playing a role in this regional collaboration. I think this is something that is a testament, Parmendra, to you and to your team in the South Pacific Central Banking Program for working in very close collaboration with banks and with staff in the banks to understand the issues at play, to build capacity and to develop a vision for the future. So this is going to be an important session, I think, just focusing in on COVID-19 and the experience of Pacific Island countries and how we can reframe and rethink about policy going forward. I'm really delighted to be joined by co-host Lotta Shu Zibel, and Lotta is joining us as the Regional Director of the Pacific Liaison and Coordination Office of the Asian Development Bank based in Sydney. Lotta, welcome to you, and I know you have a couple of remarks also to make.
Thank you, Caitlin, and Honourable Alex Hawke, Governors, Deputy Governors, Professor Evans, Dr. Sharma, colleagues from Griffith University and colleagues attending this forum today. Thank you for the opportunity for ADB to support this event. Let me first say a few words about the role of central banks during the COVID crisis. The central banks worldwide, not just in the Pacific, have done a superb job in stabilizing the economy through monetary policy stimulus. In concert with fiscal authorities, they have been at the forefront of the response. The pandemic has been a tremendous shock, and the good news is that the banking sector has not been at the epicenter, but the effects have certainly not gone unnoticed. And this episode will require us to think more deeply about what we can do to make the financial system more resilient. And this episode has also caused ADB to think more deeply about providing the best and most appropriate support to the development partner countries or development member countries that we serve. So in April this year, we announced a 20 billion comprehensive response package. And as of 23rd of October this year, we had committed 12.5 billion to support development member countries and the private sector. For the Pacific, we expect that our total COVID-related support will exceed 600 million by the end of this year. And most of this, 377 million, is in the form of counter-cyclical budget support under our new COVID Pandemic Response Program, or CIPRO. And most, if not all, of these CIPROs include support to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And in addition to this, we have provided extensive technical assistance to Pacific governments in developing their response program in the areas of debt management, social protection, gender aspects, and their COVID-19 response. And we're also supporting vaccine programs. We're discussing with Samoa, Tonga, Tuvalu, Vanuatu about helping them roll out a COVID-19 vaccine. And we expect that Pacific developing member countries will be able to benefit from a new regional financing facility for vaccine access that we're in the process of setting up. And the indicative resource envelope for this facility is about $9 billion. And we aim to launch it by the end of this year. And at ADB, we're now looking forward to how we can deliver on our vision of a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable Asian Pacific. I'd like to highlight 6 important areas. So despite border closures, globalization will come back, but will take a different shape. So to be ready for this, we will continue to promote regional cooperation and integration. We need to address worsening income inequality and poverty, and this we will do by investing more in health, education, social protection, and gender. We will continue to promote infrastructure investments, and we remain committed to achieving our targets in climate investment. The pandemic has quickly moved us online, and this means that we need to accelerate digital transformation and also carefully consider cybersecurity. The pandemic has placed a significant strain on individual countries' budgets, and this requires to place added focus on domestic resource mobilization and tax reforms. And there is a need to ensure equitable and affordable access to vaccines. Now, as this is a central bank governors forum, I would like to say a few words on the finance sector's critical role, particularly small enterprises' role for sustainable economic recovery. Now, COVID-19 pandemic is hurting small enterprises globally. So quick recovery of these businesses can mitigate dire consequences. But beyond immediate recovery, we need to ensure the medium to long-term survival of small businesses by removing impediments to their growth. So as part of ADB's support, we are in Papua New Guinea preparing a project for approval in 2021 for improving financial access and entrepreneurship development. A regional TA is being prepared for micro, small, medium enterprise development. This is $3 million, and this project will support COVID-19 affected MSMEs recover from the economic slowdown. With EU financing, we will provide support to Pacific development banks, and this regional technical assistance will support development banks in Fiji, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Tonga, and Vanuatu, and to enable them to increase lending to MSMEs. In Nauru, we're implementing a community financial capability program to improve financial literacy of households. And in Samoa, a technical assistance project will support money transfer operators to meet their customers' due diligence requirements using online platform for identity verification and sanctions checks. And this will also help lower the cost of remittances. And we have also commissioned the University of New South Wales to prepare a paper on central bank digital currencies for the Pacific. And of course, the Private Sector Development Initiative, PSDI, which was also mentioned by Honorable Alex Hawke, have provided immediate support in response to the economic impacts of COVID-19. And just to name a few of these important initiatives, they have the Cook Islands. They've helped the Cook Islands develop to draft the COVID-19 Economic Response Act, which was passed in July this year. PNG to develop COVID-19 Business Response Bill, and government-owned banks in Cook Islands, Kiribati, and Palau to develop their COVID-19 responses. And forthcoming support will address long-term impacts on banks, retirement funds, and MSMEs. So with these words, I would like to thank you again for inviting me to participate in this event. And I would now also like to ask all the governors to please turn on their cameras, and the governors will now be invited to deliver their 5-minute remarks on opportunities and challenges with central banking. So as mentioned before, Governor Ali will in this session be represented by Deputy Governor Esala Masitabua, who will be asked to begin with his remarks. And he will then be followed by Governors Simeon Athy, Lloyd Bakani, Luke Forau, and Abrao Vasconcelos. And we would like to ask you to please keep your remarks to 5 minutes. Thank you. So Deputy Governor Masitabua, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lotte. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Fellow governors, distinguished guests, participants, Bula from Fiji, and I'd just like to make a few comments before I start. I would like to acknowledge the comments by the Vice Chancellor on I'm a proud alumni of Griffith, and I acknowledge that, and also some of the comments that have gone this morning. So it's a pleasure to be with everyone. Again, on behalf of governors, apologies, and apologies to the fellow governors, but I'm very happy to be here to share some thoughts on this, and I hope I'll do justice to it. Just some preliminary comments, I think, just to re-emphasize some of the comments that have gone before me, and specifically by the Minister. I think one of the greatest things we're grappling with as policymakers and central bankers is we've come through a period of relative prosperity, if I can call it that. So the immediate challenge that we are faced as policymakers, central bankers, is the threat of this crisis undoing some of the gains that we have made over the past few years, over the past decade. That weighs heavily on our conscience. Just recently, we were talking about We were reviewing our plans at the central bank. We had just launched our strategic plan not so long ago, just on the eve of the crisis, and suddenly we were hit with COVID. And we had a look at our themes, and we had 3 themes of our new strategic plan was strengthening our central banking role, uh, renewing our ways of doing business, and also fostering a culture of innovation. And we thought, I looked at it and I thought we must have been Nostradamus, because the COVID had sort of emphasized all these things to us when we looked at our role. And while we had to re-emphasize certain areas, as we are aware, during crisis, we tend to, we need to collect more data, and it's difficult to get data, but there was increasing focus on trying to get intel. Someone characterized it as in crisis, we bin count and we do detective work. So there was a lot of that, as I would imagine my fellow governors would attest to. But we saw that our focus was very much on track, but as we look at our objectives, and we felt like because of certain circumstances, government borrowings, assistance from abroad, our core mandates of our foreign reserves were adequate. And there was, of course, like anywhere else in the world, as demand have fallen, there's less pressures on price stability. But we felt like our role has not been met. If there's like in Fiji, 120,000 people unemployed. There's a increasing threat of people being pushed into poverty, financial stability, hardship. So we felt like when we look at our core mandates, we felt that foreign reserves was adequate, price stability pressures not there. The increasing thing that weighs on us as policymakers is we know there's a lot of suffering, and on top of that, there's increasing uncertainty on when this would end. So this weighs heavily on us, and it's always the best of times and the worst of times. This is what we train for as policymakers. When things are going fine, we feel like we are not, we are challenged to keep it continually going well. But it's times of crisis when we really put our shoulders to the pump, and we feel like this is what we are trained to do, and this is what our calling is for. So it's been challenging times, but we are up for the challenge, and we are extremely grateful to the assistance of people at Griffith University, the governments, and donor partners like ADB, who, as we go through the panel discussion, we'll go into a bit more depth, but they've been very helpful in helping us and our fellow governors. We've shared bilateral emails on what are you doing, what are your plans, and we've just shared that frequently, and we've seen that come out. As the minister I've mentioned, there's shared challenges, shared responses, and there's always strength in numbers. And with that, I'll conclude my opening comments. Thank you, Lottie.
Thank you, Deputy Governor Masitabua. Governor Athy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lotte. Good morning, colleagues. Let me first start by thanking the previous speakers, especially the Honorable MP Ork, who has spoken positively about certain developments. But for us, I mean, we came into this pandemic with very sound macroeconomic position, if you like. Our fiscal was positive. The inflation was low. Growth was expected to grow to be at 4%. There was stability in the financial sector and others. Since the COVID came in, we've experienced sharp contraction in the economic activity, and we've also been hit by tropical cyclone Harold. So in a way, we've been affected by 2 different disasters. While we're speaking, by the way, we've heard of that we just recorded our first case of this pandemic, coincidentally. We share similar challenges with Fiji because of our high dependency on tourism. We do have comfortable reserves, over 13 months of import cover as of September this year. Inflation is forecasted to remain within our policy range. Banks are liquid, adequately capitalized, and well provisioned. Banks non-performing loans have increased, and we will know by the end of March next year when the loan deferrals come to hand. On RBV investments, world interest rates have been reduced drastically since the declaration of this COVID. Therefore, the biggest challenge that we face is our reinvestment risk on our investments. So the bank, we continue to invest in traditional assets, or those assets outlined in the investment guideline, despite the zero yields on investments. On capital preservations, we see safety of assets as paramount due to the size of our foreign reserves. Hence, there has been no investment in riskier assets despite the zero or negative yields in the market. On the financial sector stability, we all facing this unprecedented situation. Its duration is still unknown, and therefore it's a concern, a common concern for all of us. On examinations, on-site examinations have been restricted because of social distancing, but off-site analysis are ongoing. Virtual meetings and work from home are very important, but lack of facilities and inherent site risks are our concerns. Our PCB was revised to accommodate the impact of the pandemic. And like Fiji, we do communicate regularly with our other Pacific Island countries and ensure or rather inquired on how they are addressing the impact of this COVID-19. Of course, we also work closely with banks that are subsidiaries of large foreign banks to understand what their respective home regulators are imposing, so to assist us. I thank you.
Thank you, Governor Athy. And may I now turn over to Governor Bakani.
All right, thank you, Lotte. The impact on the COVID-19, as I will next session, is preoccupied with the issue of the government financing, the budget, basically, with the declining revenue and financing of the budget. To some extent, we were lucky to have signed the staff monitoring program with the IMF early this year or late last year. So that provided some direction for government to take some critical structural reforms. But early part of this year was caught up with the COVID-19 pandemic. So much of these reforms were not undertaken or yet to be undertaken. To this respect, also BPNG was also included in a few reforms that are relating to the financial system and the payments side also. The response this year, we were expecting a positive growth. Inflation very low, around 3%, from the highs of 5 to 6% the previous years. And all the focus was on stimulating growth this year to be around 5%. But the pandemic caught up with us. We put in policy responses between March and June. Most of those policy and regulatory measures we're more of trying to provide, ease the liquidity situation in the country for both, financial institutions, so that they can provide credit to the private sector and individuals. Also liquidity for families, because to be able to withdraw savings, and at the same time the government amended the Superannuation Act to provide workers relief of up to 10% of their own savings. This is an advance payment, whilst for those affected by the COVID-19 who were taken off their jobs. On the regulatory side, banks and other financial institutions were provided loan and interest repayments moratorium up to 3 months. So those were all the measures, and we could provide a quantitative easing for government. Basically, government was looking at raising COVID-19 bonds here to fund the budget and also the health expenses. And that's why we went into a quantitative easing, providing early liquidity to those holders of existing stocks of government securities, which they then use to invest in the new COVID bond issued by government. So even that, because of the responses by government in the reforms, most of those funding associated with the staff monitoring program were delayed. And it looks like they might get into early next year. With that, the cash flow of government becomes very fundamental in terms of trying to arrest the declining state of the economy. Because also private sector creditors, despite the liquidity, the banks were not lending. We have a situation here where the two local banks were, lending to mainly SMEs, because the emphasis was SME this year, and a lot of, even including government, provided 200 million kina to SMEs. But the emphasis was on lending to SMEs, but the two foreign banks are not doing much in that particular space. So they were holding on to liquidity, and it's not really passed on to the private sector, especially the SME. Then finally, as I said, the cash flow of government became very critical. So government decided in the last parliament to amend the Central Banking Act to increase only the temporary advance facility provided to them to cover for mismatches in the cash flow between revenue and the timing of revenue. So they increased it now from what it was, 300 million kina, to equivalent of up to 12% of ordinary revenue for the preceding 3 years. Esala, maybe Fiji has the same kind of arrangement in terms of the formula for calculating temporary advance. Yeah. So this is now like, can you imagine 300 million to 1.5 billion kina worth of temporary advance provided to government. So it's repayable 12 months. They will pay interest based on a 1 year treasury bill rate. So this is the situation we're faced with now. There is some issues relating to the connection between fiscal and our price stability or monetary policy stance, but we're looking at that through our technical memorandum with the Department of Treasury to ensure that there is those controls and those connection relationship are still intact. Lotte, this is where we are at the moment. Situation has changed, but situation is the controls have been freed up more. There's a bit more flights coming in and people moving around, but still the controls or the what do you call it, pandemic measures are still in place under the new normal.
Thank you, Governor Bakani. And now I'll hand over to Governor Forau.
Thank you, Lotte. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd just like to register my sincere gratitude to Griffith University for hosting this virtual meeting. It's so pleasing to see Minister Alex and the Vice Chancellor Caroline presenting their keynote address. Would have been better if this meeting is held here in Honiara. I would be happy because you'll be spending foreign currency here, but due to the COVID, it's not possible. Anyway, I'll just briefly mention some of the challenges. I think this COVID-19 that has impacted on our in the Solomons. I think in the beginning of the year, we started off at a very high, setting ourselves a very ambitious target to achieve after learning what has been done in the past and looking forward. We came up with a strategic plan of 2020 to 2023 strategic plan, and we were supposed to implement it beginning this year. And we started off January, February. It was kind of we are on a high note to aiming to achieve some of those things that we thought that we would be able to achieve this year. But then came this COVID-19. It changes the whole dynamics of what we were doing. And by March, April, we have to change our strategy and refocus on protecting our whatever we have. And I think that was our main focus since then, since the onset of the COVID. Plus, we had a state of emergency being declared in Solomons that even make things even difficult to move around, especially. And initially, movement was restricted, but then it was relaxed. But in terms of the bank, we managed, well, we changed our focus not so much on trying to achieve what we were intending to do, but we tried to focus on protecting, especially the foreign reserves. And we sought assistance from the IMF, which was provided to us. And gratefully, the IMF provided, plus other donors to supporting our endeavor. And that really assisted in terms of our foreign reserves, which at the moment is hovering around 13, 14 months of import cover. And I think we will continue to protect that since this pandemic is uncertain. We don't know when it's going to end. So I think that will be our focus going forward. We also put in some measures, as mentioned, I think Governor Bakani mentioned some of the areas like banks were giving out repayment holidays to their clients for up to 6 months. I think that 6 months will end sometime this month, I think, November. And thereon we will decide on what next to do. The National Provident Fund too was given, the government was able to, or they were able to assist the members who are laid off, assist them to keep them going. We were expecting the economy to grow at a positive note, but now because of this COVID thing, I think all of the Pacific Islands are forecasting a negative growth for all. For next year, we expect to have a small positive growth, but that depends very much on the projects that are coming online. If they do, then we will possibly have a positive growth. If not, then we will still continue to experience this negative growth on that front. And I think we were also trying to support the government. At the moment, the government is experiencing a budgetary constraint. Funds are not that coming forth, and we're looking at exploring ways of purchasing the government bonds through the secondary market. At the moment, we haven't participated in that yet. We're still talking with the government and other interested parties. Lottie, I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Forau. Appreciate that. So now we have our last speaker, Governor Vasconcelos. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Lotte. Good morning, good afternoon, fellow governors, everyone. First of all, I would like to start with thanking Griffith University, in particular Dr. Parmender, for organizing this session. I think this is sort of the type of collaboration efforts that need to be promoted during these difficult times. As each of us, we deal with the situation in a very specific circumstance as our country is experiencing. In Timor-Leste, we are already in the 7 month of state of emergency, and the restrictions that imposed, the preventive measures that are implemented by the government over the past 7 months, we believe have proven to be successful so far. We have no death rate. Until now, you only have 30 cases, one still under treatment. Although COVID-19 does not cost lives in Timor-Leste, but it affects the economic activities in the country. It affects the employment, the household income been severely affected, individual consumption, the overall well-being of people have been affected. And this is showing in the recent reports published by a number of institutions, the United Nations, the World Bank, the reports that recently published reflect this situation. On the macroeconomic side, the inflation has been low over during this period, this whole 2020, and we expect to remain low in the remaining this year and also next year. The GDP has been affected. We expect by the end of this year will be negative 6%. Is because of the not only because of the double of the COVID-19, but also the absence of the state budget, which the parliament just approved recently last month. So we are now the government has only 3 months left to implement. So for the economy, this will be affected. What is interesting, the challenge that BCTL, the central bank, we note the interesting development in Timor-Leste created by this pandemic. We know that the COVID-19 creates a demand on how new path for development in the future should be shaped. We know that there are increased demand to develop the domestic production capacity. Timor-Leste has been a net importer over the past 20 years. All food items we imported from overseas, from Indonesia, Australia, China. And this is a new demand created by COVID-19 that we need to introduce a serious program on import substitution. And this is something that, the reason I mentioned this, because this affects how central bank we should assist the government and the private sector, the MSME sector to deal with this situation. The other interesting development that we notice is that the increased demand in developing domestic tourists. This is something I believe other colleagues also in the Pacific, we are facing the same issues. With the restriction measures that the government implement, the restriction of movement, cross-border movement, is severely affected. So the central bank, we are looking at how to help the government in designing program to help implement this initiative. The other interesting development that we note is that and this is, I think, the most important aspect, is that there is a strong demand to transfer the public sector lead economy into a private sector lead economy. Timor-Leste, over the past 18 years, the public sector always lead the economic development. So this is something that discussion have been is progressing, and this is something that the central bank, we put a lot of attention because of how we prepare the financial sector to help implement programs that the government is preparing. So what central bank we position ourselves in this? We support this initiative through a number of issues over the past 7 months. We help the government designing the models of intervention to the economy. We implement the credit moratorium program, as Governor Lui also mentioned, the implementation in PNG. We implement and already completed in October. This is a 3-month moratorium program, extend the application to individual and companies. For individuals, we have not a very high rate of participation. The form of implementation of the moratorium is that the government provide 60% subsidy as a form of payment to the commercial banks of the interest. And I think this has been successful. We do not see increase in the non-performing loans in the banking sector. The opposite that we noticed very interesting in the past 3-4 months. We see a significant decline in the non-performing loans. This is something that we would like to see. We also assist the government in redesigning the credit guarantee program, and I think Lotte, you mentioned the engagement of ADB in other Pacific countries, Tonga, Samoa, on the development bank. This is something that at Timor-Leste since 2017, we implement, the central bank helped the government design the credit guarantee program. And with this pandemic, we propose to expand the coverage of the credit guarantee program. So this now include the micro enterprises sector, which previously did not include, and a number of sectors that was not eligible to participate in the guarantee program now is including, for instance, trade. That is because of there are increasing needs to help small or informal businesses in the sub-districts and village level. So this is what we help the government. One last thing that I would like to mention, and I think this is as part of our continuing agenda, is the central bank. We push for the integration, more integration in the financial sector. We have recently just connecting the fintech companies with the connecting the e-wallet and the bank account. So this is the first time we implement, and this happened within the national switch system. So the challenge later on, I will mention in the question and answer session probably about how the system is, the infrastructure is prepared to help. I think I stop here, Lotte.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. And I think this wraps up, and thank you for very insightful comments. This was really very interesting, and I very much look forward to the panel discussion. So with this, I will hand over to Mervyn, who will lead us into the next session here. Over to you, Mervyn.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you to the governors for those remarks. Very provocative thoughts. I was just having a quick look at some of the chats coming through. A lot of the participants who are eagerly participating in today's session are very, very pleased just to have the word of the governors, and of course some of their thoughts, some interesting takeaways. And now we'd like to invite Professor Brian to please join us for the Q&A session.
Thanks so much, Mervyn. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Can I just reiterate that comment? It is really fantastic, and what a unique opportunity to have the governors and here ready to speak and to address questions. Again, we're really grateful to you for your time, but also your expertise and very generously sharing with us today. I should note, we've got a couple of questions, well, quite a few questions actually, to pose to you, to all of you. There are some very targeted questions that will just be directed to particular governors. I note that these are not questions I've put together. They come from the participants from the central banking community around the region. So they are reflective of issues that are on people's minds and questions that are lingering. I think you've done a fabulous job of setting the tone for our discussion already. And in fact, you've dealt with my first question, which was really to set out the most pressing challenges that you're facing. And I think from my notes, you know, from Fiji, in terms of maintaining an innovation agenda and dealing with impacts on the tourism sector, Vanuatu, managing reinvestment risk as a key challenge, from Papua New Guinea in terms of coming back to the critical reforms that you had started to implement and looking at how to continue to advance that agenda and to stimulate growth. From the Solomon Islands, protecting foreign reserves, and from Timor-Leste, you know, really looking at how we might shape that future development path, in particular building domestic production capacity. They were some of the key themes that I really took away from your initial remarks. I'm going to dive in a little bit further on a couple of key areas and ask for a 2-minute response from each of you. And that's going to be looking in particular at an issue that many of you have addressed in terms of the measures that your banks are taking to help ease financial stress. And we've heard a little bit about loan repayment extensions and things like that. But I wonder if you can talk just briefly to the particular measures you're looking at to ease the financial stress being experienced by businesses and households to ensure a smooth flow of credit to the private sector. And if we can keep to the same order, that would lead me, Deputy Governor Masitabua. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
That's fine, Professor Caitlin. Thank you. From the Reserve Bank, one of the important things we've done, like most other central banks, is we reduced the policy rate. So we understand that we have to ensure that the costs of banking remain low. So that includes providing the necessary liquidity measures. We want to ensure that liquidity is high, so it places a downward pressure on those interest rates. And likewise, so we've reduced that policy rate and continue to maintain maintain liquidity in the system that places downward pressure. And also we've reiterated constantly in our communications that we are committed to ensuring that those conditions remain accommodative. So it places that downward pressure on interest rates. In terms of ensuring that, I think one of the governors alluded to this, probably Governor Bakani, it's difficult because the banks in these times of crisis, it's hard to continue to lend, but we continue to engage with moral suasion and providing special targeted facilities, import substitution, export facilities, disaster recovery. Our disaster facility, we've renamed it disaster containment so that it can capture the pandemic. Previously, it was just natural disasters. So we try to push out these special facilities, and includes a credit guarantee scheme, which we also have tweaked. So this is all an effort to try and continue that credit to those that need it. We understand that businesses, as was mentioned, need to tread water. It's difficult times, demand has fallen, and so we are maintaining that liquidity support and also providing the forward guidance that we are committed to remaining, keeping those liquidity pressures or accommodative situation.
I wonder then if I can come, Governor Bakani, to you on those measures. Perfect.
There we go.
Yeah.
Right. Our main challenge, basically to try and stimulate growth this year, given the declining level of economic activity in Papua New Guinea. And that's through some of the, as I've said, policy and regulatory measures that we introduced this year to provide liquidity, low interest rate environment to the economy. That's our stance has been very accommodative in terms of monetary policy. But again, as I said, the reduction, given the transmission mechanism not working properly, some of these interest rates are not passing through to the real economy. The issue we have also is again coming down to in the process of trying to stimulate growth through private sector credit, given that the government is constrained by its low revenue and financing of the budget. They have been pressured to manage the cash flow this year. So that's where the issue for us is to see where we are now in terms of the relationship between fiscal and monetary policy. And that was done through them increasing the level of temporary advance by amending the Central Banking Act to allow for the increased level of temporary advance in Papua New Guinea. That the Central Bank will provide to government. So that's our issue on hand, and I think it's very current discussion going on, and to look at how we can maintain that relationship through an MOU that will be signed between ourselves and the Department of Treasury. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Governor. And Governor Forau, just on that question of what the bank is doing to ease financial stress to business and households, if you could address as well.
Okay. Yeah, like I was just saying that like other Pacific Central Bank neighbors, our policy stance still is accommodative. So one of the main objectives is to support the government in its effort to protect the economic activities from further deteriorating as the result of this COVID-19. And like I mentioned earlier, that the government, in consultation with us, we and the National Provident Fund, we are able to assist especially those employees who have been laid out from their work to get some portion of their contribution in the fund, at least to help them sustain for a while. And that has been done, and it's already, although the number was not up to what we expected, we thought that there's going to be a higher number, but it turned out that not everyone needed the money. So probably due to the sustainable, we have agricultural bike as a cushion to go to. In terms of our own policy rate, well, we don't have a policy rate, but our cash reserve requirement was also reduced, although there is still excess liquidity in the system. But I think like what Deputy Esala was mentioning, one of the tools that we mainly use is to use the moral suasion to get the banks to at least assist these clients to help them. But that's one of the issues that we also experience, is that given the weakness in the transmission mechanism of the monetary policy, it's not so much on the monetary policy alone. We found out that it's also something to do with the fiscal side of it. While the banks are willing to lend, there is also another part from the fiscal side that they see that it's not complementing what we wanted to do. So we are working with the government to identify these obstacles to get it done. One clear example is like for properties, people who wanted to get a mortgage, they have to get the registered titles from the government. Now that process to get the title registered, it takes ages, and the banks want land if that title is not registered at the Ministry of Lands. So that's one of the issues that we've been talking, and I've been approaching the government, the relevant authorities to sort this thing out, because not only it will slow down the banks from lending, but it also has other effects. If the loan does default, then the risk of the banks not getting that property is very high, and that will build on to another problem. So these sort of issues, they bring up to all sorts of problems that we have, and we are working with them to get this thing done. The other thing that we have a guarantee scheme in place that we support, well, for the commercial banks to use it for their clients that have good projects to get. At the moment, with the coming of the new development bank, it appears that this guarantee scheme will be busted by end of this year. Well, that's how it is going at the rate at this time. We are also exploring other things, other instruments like import-export substitution scheme. We are still exploring that option. It's still open. And in consultation with the government as well, the utility companies have reduced their rates, especially the power company. That's one of the areas that also supported, especially customers in that line. And also in terms of the telecommunication, the company that is the undersea cable company have given the telecom providers 50% free bandwidth, which they can also pass it on to their customers. These are some of the things that are rightly placed in at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks, Governor Forau. Governor Athy, good to have you back. We were just dealing with the question of what the banks might be doing to ease financial stress for businesses and households in the immediate term to maintain that smooth flow of credit. I wonder if you have just a very brief response to that.
Thanks very much. This is a very interesting topic to be discussing together with the other governors. But let me say at the outset that the measures we undertook was basically to support the government's efforts and policies put in place. And I think I must say that they've done a lot. The government of probably our respective countries have really done a lot to try to ease the situation. So we have also taken the similar stance by the other central banks in the region to ease the monetary policy. We've reduced our official rates. We have also resorted to moral suasion, as it were, to have, first of all, beginning with weekly meetings with the banks, then later on fortnightly, and now monthly on their situations. And I think that's a very, very important dialogue. We've managed to learn from each other and work out ways to address this matter. We have asked the banks and financial institutions to submit their PCPs, their business continuity plans. We've also taken the decision to reduce CAR, capital adequacy ratio, from 12 to 10%. We allowed for deferral of loan repayments, as I said earlier, from March to September this year, and we just issued another directive for further deferral to March next year. We've also issued guidance to banks on cybersecurity of remote work during the pandemic. So like I said, we can only address this pandemic together with the other authorities, and that is the government. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Governor Athy. We have talked a little bit this morning, and it's come up in the earlier session, but also briefly in your opening remarks around the role and significance of support from the international community. I wonder if you're each able to speak to that, potentially to talk about the support you've received to date, and make a comment on, is that the right support, enough support? What would you like to see? Again, Deputy Governor Masitabua, if we can begin with you.
Thank you, Caitlin. I think the support so far has been very positive. There's been, ever since the COVID broke out, we've had a lot of liaisons with IMF, with various donor partners, with ADB, and even this. So it has rolled out. I think it's something that we've all learned from the last crisis not so long ago, and things just slip into place. But I think the international support has been positive. Of course, there was some alluded to this morning by Minister Hawke, another, the announcement and continuing to announce those support. So I think it has been very, very positive. I think, as Governor Luke mentioned, for us, the ongoing uncertainty is what weighs on us. And as small open economies, we have the challenges of our foreign reserves. We continue to have to buy medicine. We continue to have to ensure that there's capital flows for these international companies that are operating within our boundaries, so that it continues to engender confidence. This is something else that the minister had mentioned, and that's a fine line that we tread in trying to continue to have the confidence through all this, because we know that this will end one day, and we have to be ready to take that upswing. So that's where I feel the support, the continuing support, especially if this thing persists. We have some positive news about the vaccine, but if it does persist, then there'll be serious challenges, especially for small open economies, and that we just run out of space, and we cannot borrow internationally anymore, and that ability to preserve our external stability, which is tied to our exchange rate and all that is so. As we continue to progress, we cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. So while again, very positive support, but we need that support to continue to progress along this path.
Thank you. I think that's a really sobering reflection of where we're at. Governor Athy, over to you.
The question on the support that we've received, we have received offers from the national financial institutions like the IMF, ADB, the World Bank, but I don't think the government has agreed to Vanuatu to undertake any particular facility or loan facility with them with regards to this particular pandemic. But we continue to work together with the, well, you mentioned here about locally as well as international. So we continue to work with the bank, with the government, with the banks and other private sectors in Vanuatu to see how we can work together on addressing this pandemic. So I would say that I guess I would echo the same point that Deputy Governor for RPF said, that we need to look at these things against our position externally. If only we can get assistance in terms of grants, I think that would be a more preferred option for smaller countries struggling to pay off their external debt. Thank you.
Thank you. Governor Bakani, your thoughts on the international community support?
Okay, here we are. Right. Thank you, Caitlin. Look, apart from the domestic financing, as I said, this year, the government raised over 2 billion worth of bonds, and that we helped by providing through quantitative easing that we implemented. It was success. It was oversubscribed, so it was that helped in terms of funding the budget. Externally, we were successful in getting the IMF worth of 363 million under the rapid credit facility. That was back in June. So among the 3 countries that we were one of them in the Pacific. Other donors also assisted, and both by bilateral and multilateral in terms of indirect support through provision of PPEs for the health sector to address the spread of coronavirus. Now, we still have the government, they still have the other budgeted external financing, especially those related to the staff monitoring program that we had with the IMF. Those were delayed, and that whilst ongoing concessional loans for projects continue, but at a slower pace. So it means it's adding a bit more pressure on both financing of government and also indirectly on our level of reserves. That's it, Kathleen.
Thank you, Governor Bakani. Governor Forau, over to you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Yeah, in terms of international support, can I just say that this COVID-19 has really changed the focus of the government, and they put more emphasis on mitigating or trying to ensure that this COVID-19 does not come into the country. So in other words, what it means is that the government has to reallocate its budget that was passed earlier in the year to the health sector. So that really changes the whole game of not so much on growing the economy, but protecting or trying to get rid of the disease or the virus. Unfortunately, we have positive cases now, so but it's contained in the quarantine facilities, so that's still okay. So that and the international support was really positive in that regard, that they've been able to support the government effort in ensuring that this pandemic does not spread to the community. And it has, in fact, the donors have also supported the government's initiative on this economic stimulus package, which the government put in place. The chunk of it comes from the donors. In terms of the International Monetary Fund, we did receive a debt relief from the fund. I think we were the only one in the Pacific to get the debt relief. And then we get the, we also took the 28 million assistance from the fund, which really supported our foreign reserve, and of course with the donor partners in the funds that also contributed to maintaining our level of foreign reserves at a comfortable level at this time. So yeah, it was very positive, and it was so pleasing to hear from Minister Alex pledging another 304 million, I think, to the Pacific. So yeah, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. I'm worried that I may have missed Governor Vasconcelos, but I can't see him on the screen. So can I just have confirmation from our team in the background that that Governor Vasconcelos is not there and I'm not missing? Technical issues. Okay, thank you. I know that this can be a little challenging working in the virtual world, so thank you for your patience in working through some of those technical issues. Hopefully, Governor Vasconcelos will be able to join us shortly. We've just got a couple of targeted questions. I'm going to keep this fairly short. We've only got 10 minutes before we break, and then come back for another round of questions that Lore will be leading. But I wonder, just in dealing with a couple of these, the first is to you, Governor Bakani, and it's really in relation to the quantitative easing measures you've already spoken to, but I just want to make sure we haven't missed anything. Essentially, the question is that the Bank of PNG is proposing a quantitative easing program to support economic activity and growth. What would you be able to, or can you provide more details on this program? What type of securities are you purchasing? What are the maturities? What quantity are you looking to purchase? And what advantages do you see from a quantitative easing program over further reductions of the Kina facility rate? That's a big question.
Yes, definitely, Kathleen. It's a big question. Let me elaborate further on the quantitative easing that we announced in our monetary policy statement back in March. Firstly, as I said, the quantitative easing was through buyback of or early redemption of securities by mainly and securities comprised of treasury bills and bonds with terms from 1 year to 5 or even 10 years. So those were, but the composition they were mainly treasury bills of up to 1 year. Those who held those bills, a few banks or sold back those bills were banks and non-banks, mainly the super funds and the insurance firms, insurance companies. So they then reinvested those funds or liquidity back into the purchase of the COVID-19 bond issued by government, which is the 2 billion that I mentioned earlier, 2 billion Kina. In terms of the Kina facility rate, again, let me go back to the quantitative easing again. Now, one thing that we notice is that I think it's central banks. We need to analyze that. This is thus increasing our balance sheet, and I want us to look at that and also see in terms of revenue also, because we're holding more of government bonds, government securities, and thus will whilst our operations this year have been delayed, some of the projects and all that, thus expenditure is low, so our revenue might be very high this year, given that we are holding a lot of these government papers. On the reducing the Kenya facility rate, the issue is back to the transmission mechanism of the weakness in the transmission. And again, like our colleagues, Governor said, we'll be looking at other measures to try and, moral suasion is one, but there's other issues also that we want to address relating to the behaviors of banks.
Thank you. That's great to get a little more detail there. Really appreciate that. My next question is to you, Deputy Governor Masitabua and Governor Athy. COVID-19 has significantly affected the tourism sector, and you've both mentioned that already. Fiji and Vanuatu's economies in particular are affected by this. What role do you see for monetary policy relative to fiscal policy in supporting the economy, particularly while the effects of COVID-19 on global tourism persist? And if you can speak also to the recovery phase, that would be great. I might begin, Deputy Governor, with you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Now we see monetary policy continue to play a very active and accommodative role. I think that was mentioned earlier. One of the things that this crisis has highlighted, as with other crises, is the importance of the coordination of the fiscal and the monetary policy. That is, and we see this as continuing. One of the challenges is we understand with the crisis is the effects on you mentioned recovery. We had a recent discussion where we invited the Tourism Association to our board meeting, and they had highlighted to us, and this is something that we are aware of, that with crisis there is scarring, and with scarring there is that ability to recover. And this goes to the loss of skills, like as the industry remains dormant, people are not brushing up on their skills, the infrastructure gets affected. And how do you keep this going, especially when it continues to be uncertainty and there's cost to it? And the cost, the banks can only help them so much. their shareholders can only help them so much. So these are the challenges that are weighing on. We have this on the tourism industry. I think Vanuatu will have the same challenge. We have this huge stock that's just sitting there, and it's the challenges of continuing to keep it, to be able to, we feel that when borders open, there will be a propensity to travel, because we see it in every day that people are, as soon as lockdown is over, everyone wants to jump on a plane. But the scarring that this continuing uncertainty will, impact in is going to impact on that. So for monetary policy, we just see our role as continue to integrate with fiscal side and continue to be very supportive. The other thing that was mentioned is going outside our role. We are constantly having to provide advice and support to government to be able to handle the health and handle the discussions and handle confidence issues. So we just see ourselves as, really supporting that push from government and, the complementing the fiscal side of things.
Thank you. Thank you. Governor Athy, do you have anything to add to that from your perspective?
Yes, I do. I mean, this is a very interesting, perhaps relevant question. I mean, you're right to say we are mostly affected by COVID through tourism. Services industry compose about 2/3 of Vanuatu's GDP, and tourism alone is a bigger player in the services sector. I agree fully with what Deputy Governor Esala is saying on Fiji. We face the same here. It does have that sort of far-reaching or spiral effect on jobs, on business revenue, on domestic demand, and it goes on and on. I think the one lesson that we learn from this crisis is that you need to really diversify your economy. Hinging or relying on one particular sector can become very risky in such time. So I see that as an area that we need to really try to refocus in terms of policy. I think government becomes cognizant of the fact that we need to do something. They've been holding meetings with the industry themselves on the way forward, and I would we always agree, or we always to meet with them to provide what we can provide them. As well, for us, this is one of our sources of foreign exchange, as well as Fiji, no doubt. When it's down, remittances down, we're expecting tough times ahead if it continues. If the pandemic continues, it will have more effect or impact on our economy. So for the time being, I think we're okay. I mean, on the question of monetary policy, again, I think we've done enough. We've been adequately accommodative in our policies instruments. We even went to the extent to reactivate facilities like disaster reconstruction and credit facility, import substitution and export facility. I think we're ready to do business, if you like, with the economy. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I do know there's some work happening at Griffith as well, actually, through our the Centre for Tourism, looking at the recovery of tourism across the Pacific as well. So we'll make sure that we share anything with you in that space. And I do hope, just to echo Governor Forau's words from earlier, that we might be able to meet in person as part of that in Honiara next year. So we'll keep that definitely on the agenda. Look, I think we've actually exhausted our time, I'm afraid, and it's been really tremendous to hear from each of you. It's not over yet. We have a 10-minute break, and I know Lotta has another round of questions that have been prepared by the participants for each of you. But we do want to make sure that we give you a break, and we're really grateful again. You've faced some fairly hard-hitting questions from our participants. Thank you for being really frank in your and very thoughtful in your responses to those. I think that's enormously helpful, and it's like being in a masterclass, I've got to say, on economic policy. So fantastic to hear from you. I'm just going to check now. I think we can take a break and return at 11:35, and Lotta will be leading the next session. Mervyn, is there anything you wanted to add as our MC, or is this all, are we on track?
We are very much on track. A big vinaka vakalevu to the governors for those very frank comments. And thank you to you, Professor, for facilitating such an interesting session. Vinaka.
You're welcome, vinaka. Thank you, governors.
All right, well, thank you all for your very insightful comments today. And I really appreciate your very frank discussions. So now we have about 50 minutes at our disposal. So I will be asking a few questions also that our participants have provided, and that will be posed to all governors and deputy governors. And it will be on issues including financial inclusion, digital financial services, as well as on what's next going forward. So as mentioned, I follow the same order as before. So we'll start with Deputy Governor Masitabua. And I will first touch on a topic that we haven't discussed in any great detail today, and that's on financial inclusion. So the question I would like to pose to all of you is, what has the implication of COVID-19 been on your bank and country's financial inclusion agenda? And is the priority likely to change? So if we could start with Deputy Governor Masitabua. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Lotte. For us, the crisis has increased the emphasis on financial inclusion. I think we know that when we embarked on our financial inclusion journey almost a decade ago, we understood that we are trying to push out financial services as a means to alleviating poverty, as one of those tools that can help people raise them out of poverty. So we understand as that the COVID and the implications of COVID is threatening some of these gains and threatening to push a lot of people back into those dire circumstances that financial inclusion is aimed at picking them out of. So for us, it has increased the emphasis on financial inclusion. We've evolved our financial inclusion from access to this, trying to design or to pushing out products that actually help these people at the bottom of the society, at the bottom of the pyramid. So in terms of answering your question, we feel that the emphasis is heightened because we understand that a lot more people are without jobs or working reduced hours and are challenged. So the issue, as always, is the constraints around that and balancing our resources in terms of meeting that. But well and truly, the focus is on financial inclusion, MSMEs, green financial inclusion, and those initiatives that we continue to work on as a central bank.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Governor Athy, what are your thoughts on this?
I was just saying that the border closure and social distancing procedures had minimal effect on financial inclusion efforts in the form of face-to-face meetings and catering, like events. But this is an issue that financial inclusion is an issue that we all targeting. We all regionally amongst the central banks of the region. The COVID, I believe, will provide us the opportunity to promote and encourage innovation and accessibility. The risk of use of cash versus digital means, I think, has been highlighted. We need to continue, I guess, to encourage diversified and innovative products such as mobile money, insurance, and remittances. Also need to assist businesses, MSMEs, access affordable and accessible credit financing. I think it's very important that we, after COVID, with all this in place, we will be able to excel from our agenda for financial inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Athy. I would now like to turn to Governor Bakani and to hear your thoughts on the role of financial inclusion and the priority placed on that.
Unmute already. Thank you, Lotte. Look, despite the pandemic, I think it has provided a further, enhancement or redirection on or emergence of some areas that we can look at in terms of promoting and enhancing our financial inclusion agenda. Although we have not, from a central bank point of view, we have not done, some of the things that we plan to do this year because of restrictions on travel and all that. Nevertheless, our Center for Excellence in Financial Inclusion, or CEFI, has continued to drum a lot of activities. With first of all, the major project that we have this year, commencing this year, is with the IFAD program, which is for targeting 25,000 farming families around 6 provinces in Papua New Guinea. So these are farmers involved in different croppings in Papua New Guinea, and the funding from IFAD is helping us to provide financial inclusion, starting from training on budgeting, leading up to opening of accounts for those families, and also linking them with the supply chain, or the buyers of the crops they have. That's one. We just released our promotional videos and of launch on life insurance. As you'll know, we look after life, but I guess, the number we have at the moment is 2% of our population is insured. So and that's very small compared to a population of 8 to 10 million. So that's starting with a lot of videos, promotional videos, and which is available on CEFI website. Any of you can go in and see some of the videos we have. We also have ongoing training for women groups, and also for the media fraternity, that we are continuing with CEFI. And also, I guess one of the things that started this year, because of the restrictions on movement of people, microbanks and banks also has, and even savings and loan societies introduced mobile phone products, so allowing the membership to stay at home and do their banking rather than traveling to the banks because of the restrictions both in transport and their movements. The final one that we have is now with the farmers, also together with the farmers in oil palm, one of our province that is in oil palm. We're doing a targeted financial inclusion training on financial inclusion for the farmers and the workforce in that particular province. The workforce is the work for New Britain palm oil So that's the first one for this year, which we will do at the end of this month. So I think the emergence of mobile banking, again, products has been the one positive, especially given the restrictions on travel and movements of people during the pandemic. Thank you, Lotte.
Thank you, Governor Bakani. And so I'd like now to get some views from Governor Forau. If I could hand over to you.
Thank you, Lotte. Yeah, like what DG Esala was saying, this COVID pandemic pushed us to focus more on the financial inclusion space, as we know that the majority of our population, they don't have access to financial services. So I think the financial inclusion space is the space that they would be able to have access to that. And we've had some good success. Like now we have this NPF, or the superannuation savings, mainly for the informal sector. And we have launched an app where the members from the informal sector can use their airtime for savings. Instead of using them to call their families or whatever, they can use that to save at the superannuation. And that has increased exponentially in recent months. And I think that's one of the success stories for us in that space. And there are other projects that we are also focusing on at the moment. There's one we are currently in partnership with UNCDF and UNDP. We are looking at setting up a digital marketplace. And this is in anticipation that there will be a lockdown due to this COVID-19 thing. And this is more similar to the concept of Amazon, but on a smaller scale. And that we are just holding up the consultant that we are supposed to engage is still await pending the exemption from the government to have him over in the country in the next month or so. There's also another project that the government we are working closely with the government to come up with a digital economy strategy. And this is the nationwide strategy with the government, and it's also supported by UNCDF partnering with us. So these are some of the projects that we are working on it. And at the same time, we are also working on our third financial inclusion strategy, which begins next year. And we are currently doing the consultation at the moment. So yeah, I think the pandemic has really pushed us to move some of these projects faster than what we expected. But of course, these projects need consultants or expertise from overseas. Only the restrictions in the travel that is holding us back. Thank you.
I think these are really interesting discussions. I wanted to go a little bit deeper into some of these technologies that several of you have mentioned as well. So in the context of COVID-19, given the increasing relevance and importance of digital financial services and remittances, what are some of the regional priorities to accelerate the regulatory reforms building financial infrastructure to support digital financial services? So again, if I could start with Deputy Governor Masitabua, if you'd like to share your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Lotte. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, when we started off on our strategic plan, one of our focus was on innovation and also renewing our ways of doing business. So we had implemented on, or we had started on that journey of trying to, foster innovation and renewing some of the ways that we do business, and leveraging technology was a huge part of it. So at the national level, what are we doing? We have embarked on a similar program to some of our South Pacific brothers and sisters, and we have started, or we have embarked on the National Payment Systems Program, the reform of our payment system, which starts off with an act, and also looking at automated transfer systems and central depository. We've been working with our central banks in the South Pacific and also Australia and New Zealand central banks on the centralized KYC that should help remittances, and also the sandbox, which we are collaborating with Athy and trying to encourage sandbox guidelines, the regional sandbox guidelines. So these are some of the initiatives we are pushing out and focusing very much on leveraging of technology to try and overcome some of the challenges that the pandemic has brought about, but also to enhance efficiency and the delivery of our services.
Thank you, Deputy Governor Masitabua. And if I could go on to Governor Athy, if you'd like to share your thoughts.
So sorry, Governor Athy has just dropped out.
Okay.
Maybe if you'd like to continue. Yeah.
We can continue. I'll go over to Governor Bakani. And I know that you've already touched upon a few of the initiatives that you're doing. Maybe you could explain a bit more on what you're doing on this area. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think the main focus for us is on building the infrastructure, which is the payment system. We moved on now to the national switch, which is already in operation, allowing interoperability that will foster connectivity among the first, second, and third tier financial institutions that we already got into the retail electronic payment system. Again, with the assistance of the World Bank, we are driving this into the next phase, which is to include MNOs, mobile phone companies, telecommunication companies, and already, mobile wallet platform which will create a mobile wallet platform. The one that we are looking forward to introducing next year is the CSD, the depository platform. So that will again be a new one that replaces the current one we have. So that together with the thinking of retailing all the or some of the government securities that we have on our books in the secondary market. So that will enable that also to take place. We rolling out our target. I mean, our main focus again is to have the sandbox, which we launched late last year. We have not progressed. We have applicants already in, but we are assessing them. The committee is assessing them to see. The main focus of us is to have a rollout any digital ID, which of course we're working together with the ADB in terms of coming up with a product that we hope to approve and roll out to all the financial institutions. So providing only one-stop shop for customers to have one single ID that can be accessible at all institutions. Thank you, Lotte.
Thank you, Governor. And Governor Forau, if you would like to share your thoughts as well.
Thank you, Lotte. Yeah, on that digital finance, financial services, our national payment system, which should have been done early this year, but it was pushed back due to travel restrictions. So we could not have our hardware being installed until this restriction is reduced or slowed down, so that we have this expertise coming over to do that. But at the moment, we are looking at the legislation, which is, I think it's in the first reading now, it's in the parliament. We are hoping that by next year, this legislation should be over and done with, so we can progress this national payment system. And on the EKYC, I think the governors will be discussing one which the Reserve Bank of Australia too will be updating us next week during the governance meeting on that one. I think that's from us, Lotte.
Thank you. I think there's some really important initiatives here. I think there's a lot of work in the region on digital IDs and the KYC framework as well. And I think those are really good areas and will have a huge impact on financial inclusion as well. I just wanted to know, I think Governor Vasconcelos is not there yet, so I think we'll go on to the next question, which is a little bit more forward-looking. So we'll be talking about sharing of information so information sharing and policy making today. So in light of COVID-19 pandemic, what are your views on the idea of establishing a regional information sharing or policy making think tank or body? How could we operationalize such a concept? So if we could start again with Deputy Governor Masitabua.
Thank you, Lotte. I think as we have been mentioning, or as has been mentioned so many times again, that I think regional cooperation is very important. We have shared challenges and therefore shared solutions are probably the way forward. So we have embarked on this journey with Griffith University. We on this regional platform, and I feel that it's been very successful. I think we need to be able to have a better platform to be sharing some of the challenges and sharing some of the information. So we definitely support the collaboration between central banks on a structured and formalized platform. And we feel that we are moving in the right direction. We understand that it's not easy, there are challenges, but I also feel that with the support, we need a catalyst to help it along. And we have a feeling that, some sort of assistance from probably the big countries like Australia and New Zealand can be or ADB can be that catalyst that will drive this platform along and help us to stand on our 2 feet before we are able, to start moving it forward definitively. And we say this because it has been evidenced in other parts of the world, and also with the PEFTEC here in the Pacific. It just needs, in Fiji and the Pacific, it just needs some catalyst to bring us together. And Griffith University has taken us as far as we can, and we feel that the time is probably right for other partners to come in and push this further along in terms of establishing that, that formalized structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Governor. And I think Governor Athy may not be here yet, so this will be going back to Governor Bakani if you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I'm here now.
Oh, you are? Very good. So we'll go to Governor Athy. We'll come back to Governor.
It wasn't my choice to be missing from the screen, by the way.
Well, we missed you, so happy you're back.
So let me just say that, establishing such a think tank mechanism, and I mean, it is most welcoming, especially at this time with the pandemic. So we most appreciate this idea of a regional information sharing body. Let me just also say that we're working with the PIFTAC, IMF, and World Bank on this, and this is on ad hoc arrangement. I think what we need is an established entity dedicated for such situation, and I want to thank Griffith for coming up with these kind of ideas. In fact, one of the issues that is quite pertinent to us at the moment is this correspondent banking relationship. So, I mean, over and above COVID, we have this situation So it's good that we. By the way, next week we're having this governance meeting, South Pacific Central Bank meeting, and that is listed as one of the topics to discuss. So again, the notion of establishing a regional body to address such external shocks is most welcoming for us. Thank you.
Now, Governor Athy, since we have you back again, and I wanted to ask if you wanted to share any thoughts you have on one of the questions we posed, and when you were disconnected, just because I think this is a really interesting topic. It's on financial inclusion, so the important role of financial inclusion, but also the importance of digital financial services and remittances. So what would regional priorities be to accelerate regulatory reforms and building financial infrastructure to support digital financial services, and of course the impact on financial inclusion on that as well?
I think most of my colleagues have mentioned this project that we have with the RPA and RPN set, this KYC utility project. We believe that this project is important for us. It will assist banks and NTOs with their AML, CDF requirements on KYC, and also reduce cost of remittances. So that is very, very important for us. I think the question is on the asking about regional priorities. So that is one that will accelerate this regulatory and building financial infrastructure to support TFS. The other one is another regional project, the National Payment System, Samoa, Solomon Islands, and ourselves. Our appeal for this system is scheduled to be tabled next week in Parliament. So at least we made some progress over the last 12 months. So that too will be important to facilitate these infrastructures. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Okay, so now we'll go back over to Governor Bakani. If you wanted to share your thoughts on establishing a regional information sharing or policy-making think tank or body.
Thank you, Lotte. Like the other governor said, I think it's a great idea. Timely also, as we experienced in the past, both the good times when we are sailing so smoothly, and this year especially, given the pandemic and also past disasters. What we need is maybe this center, regional center body that can work closely with, provide on our behalf information sharing with the other bodies that can provide fast access to financial assistance. Like, for example, this year it took a long time for the IMF to make an assessment on our requirements for financial assistance, given our membership. So this body, if it's there already, would be the one linking with the IMF to provide all the necessary information and assessment of our situation so that we can have access to the funds quickly. Likewise, as the others mentioned, in terms of eKYC, addressing the issue of corresponding banking relationships, and of course the national payment system. So I guess we're moving probably in the right direction. So this regional body that we're talking about probably, in future could emerge out of these MOUs that we signed today. Thank you, Lotte.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for that. And I don't think the Governor Vasconcelos is here, so I think I'll go to my last question here. And this really has it could be a little bit provocative question. So do you envisage any substantial changes to standard central banking roles and functions post-COVID? So will independence be intact? So back over to you, Deputy Governor Masitabua.
Thank you, Lotte. I think as we look at the crisis and the challenges before us, and from us as central banks, we look across other central banks. We share, as I mentioned, we shared emails and calls of, just letting each other know what are your thoughts around some of the issues that we are facing. And increasingly, we find that while our role as central banks, is firmly entrenched in statute and in expectations. The external stability for us as small open economies is well and truly entrenched, but we are always challenged, as I mentioned earlier in my introductory comments. We have, we look at foreign reserves, it's fine. The outlook is fine. We don't have price pressures, but we know that people are suffering. So what are we doing about it? What do we need to do about it? So and as we look across other central banks, there's increasingly, while the focus is the same, we are reaching for increasingly different tools to try and achieve the same objective. We are reaching for unprecedented measures. We are reaching quantitative easing, using the central bank balance sheet, and we are increasingly forced outside what we traditionally do. I know I've read one stage, the chair of the Fed had mentioned that every red line that we know as central bankers and we are trained in, we have to cross or we go over. So with that comes to me the challenge of, reviewing the ways that we do our business, and particularly the governance and the communication part of it. I think that's a challenge as we go forward. Increasingly with social media, we will be held to account, and so that would be the challenge for us: is how do we, as we reach for these new ways of achieving the age-old objective of central banking, monetary policy objectives, how do we communicate that effectively? How our governance arrangements, Governor Bakani mentioned, these challenges of having to fund the deficit. So it seems having to tweak the law. We understand that revenue is falling. Even for us at the central bank, we've had to tweak that part of our law, because we understand that even if we don't tweak it, we will breach it, because the government revenue will fall and the 3-year average will fall. And likewise, they will suddenly, if we don't tweak that part of the law, we will just breach it by not doing anything. So increasingly, we'll reach for new instruments, for new tools. We'll probably new ones or dust out the old ones. And it brings with it the challenge of communication and governance, especially the issue we mentioned about independence. We feel as central bankers that the cost of not doing what we are doing has a far greater consequence. So and it is something that, as I mentioned, it weighs on our conscience. We will be judged by our actions, so it's not something that we take lightly, but ultimately we probably need to look at governance and a communication of how we do that better. Those are my comments. Thank you, Lottie.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your very frank comments there. If we can go over to Governor Athy.
Thank you very much. The autonomy of central banks, I think, is the main anchor of our key statutory policies, like exchange rate, the way we set the exchange rates, the way we formulate monetary policy, and so on and so forth. So I think that will remain be the same. But yes, standard may change following this pandemic, and we may have to make changes to our laws. But I want to focus on that independence. I think that is at least from our perspective, that's been one key factor that has continued to at least make sure that we we maintain the way we're doing business, and making sure that there is no external interference in the way that we carry out those policies. I think they are very, very important. They're like the other side of your shoes. I guess the other side would be the fiscal side. So that is very, very key. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Athy. So we'll go over to Governor Bakani for your views.
Thank you, Lotte. Yes, I think we're giving hard thoughts on the issue of independence, given the latest, change to the amendment to the act, which was bulldozed through by government, given the situation. Again, like what Esala has mentioned earlier, I think some of these reactions are probably brought about by maybe our conservativeness in dealing with the emergency situation that have emerged. These are some of the thoughts we have now. That we are in the process of already engaging Deloitte to work on our governance structure, which will look at all the areas of the boards, the way we conduct monetary policy, whether to have a monetary policy committee, all those kind of things. So refocusing our attention still on price stability, but how do we deal with the situation with the real economy, the real sectors. Again, we depend a lot on financial institutions to drive us through, take us through to achieve our price stability. But how do we, sometimes it's that assistance or that trend or that route is more indirect rather than direct. So it poses this question for us. So what we need to refocus on as a central bank. So that's one. Again, already the government has been talking about some further review of our act, but we've already started the process by looking at the whole of central bank governance structure. Now, another point that the focus on monetary policy, as I mentioned, like this year, given the situation, focus on with inflation low, focus on trying to beef up lending to the private sector to stimulate economic activity. But again, that if the channel is not strong, given the weakness of our transmission, then obviously, like Sala said, also they have introduced some special products which are targeted at different sectors or programs that they have. So maybe that's another way to do it. But again, how do we deal with we talked about the regional center for information sharing. What if we, and from our recollection of some of the experience of other central banks, they've also got funding of emergency situation, very emergency situations enshrined in the central banking acts. So those are kind of broad thought thinking we have, and it's all been discussed under this framework that we are reviewing now on the governance framework of the central bank. Thank you, Lotte.
Thank you, Governor. And if we could turn over to Governor Forau.
Thank you, Lotte. If you don't mind, can I just share my thoughts on the earlier question on the information sharing?
Oh, did I skip you on that? So sorry.
No, I was going to say about that information sharing. I think in such a small economies like ours, where we have very limited resources, it's only fitting that we pull our limited resources together in that area so we can utilize to the maximum benefit of us all. And having the central bank partnering with such university like the Griffith University is, in my opinion, is the best option to go forward. And in saying that, I would also like to say that Australia's Pacific Step Up it will be very nice if Australia can recognize this collaboration as one of the step up going forward. I think that's all what I wanted to say in that question. Now let me go to the last question on the central bank roles. Given this post-COVID thing, I think this post-COVID 19 really gives us new opportunities in the sense that it gives us in fact makes us do things in different ways. So it's like what we now it's called a new normal, and perhaps it's time that we should also do things differently, moving forward as a central bank, rather than doing things in a traditional way as central banks do. Probably this crisis has given us lesson to perhaps maybe look for other ways that, although we can still maintain to achieve the mandate of the central banks, but I think the way we do things will be different as in the past. But as mentioned by Esala, whether we should be judged on the actions that we did, or we should be judged on the outcome of the whether we have achieved the mandate of the central bank. I think that's very important thing to note, and that I guess it also comes back to the financial strength of a central bank, whether we should be looked at from the perspective of profit-oriented entity or be seen as a different animal altogether. I think I wrote a piece on that one in the Pacific Forum on this very thing. I think that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much for your thoughts, and thank you all, governors and deputy governors, for your comments and very thoughtful insight on this. I think that concludes our session. We're just on time, and so thank you again, and really appreciate you sharing all your thoughts on this. So over to Marvin.
I now invite Professor Fabrizio to take us through for the closing remarks. Vinaka.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. Governors, deputy governors, senior management of the central banks of Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Island, Vanuatu, and Timor-Leste, colleagues from the Reserve Bank of Australia, Reserve Bank of New Zealand, World Bank Group, Asian Development Bank, International Monetary Fund, Australia Pacific Business Council, and Griffith University. This has been indeed a very interesting and informative event, and I would like to express a vote of thanks to all those who have made this event possible. So first of all, let me thank our co-conveners, the Asian Development Bank. A huge thank you for your willingness to partner with us, not just today, but also in the annual regional central banking research conferences, as well as a proposed ARC linkage grant application. I'm also told that the ADB is sponsoring the 2021 conference in Honiara, and for this one, I thank you as well. I also would like to thank Honorable Alex Hogg for his keynote address, Professor Caroline Evans for her opening remarks, Ms. Lot Shulzi-Bell and Professor Kathleen Bird and Mr. Mervyn Singh for moderating the Q&A session, and of course all colleagues from the various agencies and institutions represented here today for their participation and contribution to the Q&A. Of course, a very big thank you to our panelists, the esteemed governors and deputy governors. I'm very grateful to you for sharing your views with us today. In these unique times, central banks, financial systems, monetary policy play, of course, a central role. At the same time, we might need to rethink the way in which we design and operationalize policies. And listening to your comments today was, in this regard, very important and informative. There were many issues that we discussed today. It was a very exciting Q&A session, I have to say. There are two issues that I would like to highlight. I could have highlighted probably 10 more, but let me just stress a couple of points that I think are particularly interesting and relevant. The first one is the enormity of the task the central banks were presented with at the onset of the pandemic. The COVID crisis threatened the stability of the financial system, the survival of businesses, and the prosperity of families and households. As such, it demanded a quick response to maintain the liquidity in the system, manage foreign reserves, buffer the risk of non-performing loans, and support government financing. So central banks had to change their strategy quickly and in a situation of high uncertainty in order to respond to many challenges of what in effect was a perfect storm. The remarks of our panelists today certainly have helped us understand how they undertook this quick adjustment and the crucial role the cooperation, both local and international, has had over the last several months. The second issue that I would like to highlight is the short to medium term outlook. Now, there seems to be a generalized expectation that economic growth will rebound next year. However, there are also expectations that the effects of the crisis will be felt past the rebound of GDP. So the impact of the crisis on the labor market, on the financial health of businesses, on the disposable income of households are going to stay with us for the medium term. And this means that COVID is not just about managing the emergency, it's also about rebuilding for the long term. And this task of rebuilding for the long term will require coordinated efforts of all policy agencies, again, nationally and internationally. Of course, preceding the Q&A sessions was another historic moment, and that was the signing of the Regional Capacity Building Memorandum of Understanding between Griffith and the central banks. This follows the regional PhD Memorandum of Understanding signed last year. And these two MOUs are a testimony to a very strong development partnership between Griffith and the South Pacific central banks. In conclusion, let me also thank the conveners of the forum, Pamendra Sharma, Jen Jesu, Mary Kim. I would like to spend an additional word to some years ago, Pamendra had the initial idea for a program that would facilitate a collegial cooperative network of central banks. And since then, he has been working continuously and tirelessly with the support of several others towards the establishment of this network. So thank you, Pamendra. Finally, my thanks also go to the steering committee of the event today. Natasha Vari, Aliyah Ravat, Jill Moriarty, Megan Thorley, Michelle Craig, and Shelley Moller. So, dear colleagues and friends, it was really a pleasure to see you all today, even if just virtually. I wish you really all the best for the future. And as it has been mentioned before, I hope that next time we can meet in person in a beautiful location. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. For our participants who have joined us, a big benevolent once again. We thank all those that took time out to be here today. And of course, a big benevolent once again to the governors. We look forward to hopefully coming to the Solomon Islands next year for the meeting. So we look forward to meeting Governor Forau and his team in person, hopefully. Just a quick message on behalf of the Deputy Governor of the RBF to Governor Forau. If you look behind me, you'll see the new $50 note we launched for our independence. We were going to give one each $50 note to all the participants. So we hope we can reciprocate in Solomon Islands. Thank you very, very much. Big Vinava Levu. You all take care. Vinaka.